I'm sure you all are excited to have us all back, right? Well, look, I think we all know the world is literally at war here. And on the Senate, far be it from me to criticize anybody about focusing on judges, but when you compare confirming district court judges to not having up the National Defense Authorization Act, you got to question the priorities of the majority. This is an important piece of legislation. We've passed it every year, I think, for 60 years in a row. And we're spending our time doing district judges. I think it's misplaced priorities. We can't stop doing everything just because there's a presidential election this year. Majority Leader needs to address some of the genuine problems that the country has.
Well, there's a big presidential debate tonight. I think everybody around the country is asking the question, who is the vice president and what does she actually stand for? After all, she's only done one interview since she became the Democrat nominee, and she spent the last month basically trying to reverse herself from all the positions that she previously held, which is hard to do because when she was in the Senate running for vice president, she had the record as the single most liberal United States senator. And they've used every chance since she has been part of the Biden administration to move the country in a very left position. And now she's trying to run away from her own record. She said that she would ban fracking, and now she says that she won't. She said that the border wall was a waste of time and un-American, and now she has moved away from that position. She has flip-flopped on confiscating guns, the electric vehicle mandate, expanding the Supreme Court, and heck, she's even flip-flopped on plastic straws. So I think what she's realized that all these positions that she staked out are way far left of where the American people are, and that her positions are incredibly unpopular. So anyone trying to understand what a Harris presidency would mean should look no further than the last 4 years and her record as vice president. Inflation is up 20.2%. There have been 10 million people who have come across the border illegally, and if given another 4 years in office, I believe a Harris presidency of high prices and open borders would be very much the same as what she has delivered for the past 4 years.
Kamala Harris is a dangerous San Francisco liberal. She has flip-flopped on one position after another as she's run for president because she's trying to run away from her radical record. On the one so-called interview that she did, she said, well, that didn't really matter because she said her values hadn't changed. Well, her values call for defunding the police but coddling the criminals. Her values call for banning certain American energy products, making energy prices go up. Her values call for eliminating private health insurance in America, but giving free health care to illegal immigrants, as well as free housing, as well as debit cards loaded with taxpayer cash. Under Kamala Harris, the crime and the chaos that we see in San Francisco, that would be the face of America. So tonight they're having a debate, and she's going to use phrases like on day one and laser focused. Well, her day one was almost 4 years ago. And when she and Joe Biden and the Democrats focus their laser, they've caused massive misery for American families. Prices are up across the board over 20%, 10 million illegal immigrants into this country, people from criminal cartels, drug dealers, people on the terrorist watch list. Kamala Harris proclaimed that Bidenomics is working. And she proclaimed that the border wall, she said it was a stupid waste of money. 2 out of 3 Americans say this country is heading in the wrong direction. And in order to try to get elected president, Kamala Harris is flipping more of her positions than IHOP flips pancakes. Well, the thing about IHOP is they only flip once. She's going to flip just right back again after the election, no matter how it turns out, because, as she said, her values haven't changed.
So just a week ago today, I returned from my 4th trip to the Middle East since the October 7th attacks. And my mission and what we hear from all over America is, number one, we must ensure the survival of Israel. Number two, we must decimate Hamas. And number three, we must see the return of our American hostages. So while I was in the region, I had the opportunity to have dinner with our hostage families in Jerusalem. And just several days after that, the absolute unthinkable happened, and we learned of the murder of Hirsch Goldberg Poland. I had just spent time with his mom, Rachel, and his father, John, and we were talking together about the return of their son. And unfortunately, his return is not what we had hoped to see. So while I was in the region, while I was visiting with leaders of not only Israel, but the Arab nations that maybe could get Hamas to the table, where's President Biden? President Biden's hanging out at the beach, kicked back in a lawn chair. Where's Kamala Harris? She's on the campaign trail. Can't even bring it to her tongue to mention our hostages, nor those Americans that were killed on October 7th. Leaders in the region, while I was visiting with them, stated they have given up on American leadership. As someone who served in the military in that region during wartime, you can't imagine how hurtful that is. We have given blood and treasure to stabilize that region, only to have President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, who is always the last person in the room, to have them throw it away. This is a consequence of 3.5 years of weak leadership coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Just 4 years ago, however, it was a different story, and we were celebrating the Abraham Accords under President Donald J. Trump. What a remarkable achievement that brought Israel and her Arab friends together. Trump brought all of our partners together, and it wasn't just military strength. It was trade and the economy. It was education. It was peace and prosperity for everyone involved. You know, we need to build upon these Abraham Accords, and unfortunately, Kamala Harris isn't going to secure that for us in the future. What she promises is greater instability in the region. So, folks, we need to get back to that peace and prosperity, but we need strong leadership to do it, and that will be Donald J. Trump.
Well, it's nice to be back in Washington after several weeks at home in West Virginia, talking with folks and around the country. And really what's top of mind in my state, because we're so heavily affected by the fentanyl scourge that is just rampant throughout this country, is immigration. And the 10 million plus people who are now in this country because of the failed Biden-Harris policies. So tonight we're going to see, hopefully we'll see a big contrast between President Trump, who brought the numbers down, who had reasonable policies in place that he as president put into effect, and the contrast being Vice President Harris, who on day one, she and President Biden opened the borders by moving through a lot of executive orders and taking down what former President Trump had been able to do. So we've heard in 2020, she said the border was a complete waste. The border wall is a complete waste of money. In 2019, she said we don't need to build a wall. It's not an emergency. In 2022, she had an interview with Chuck Todd where she said not once but twice, the border is secure. I mean, who's believing that? This is 2 years ago. That was probably 6 million people in to where we are now. She also said in 2021 or 2022 in an interview that she had actually been to the border. When in fact, the interviewer, Lester Holt, had to say, no, you haven't. And she says, well, I haven't been to Europe either. I mean, what a flippant answer to a very serious question. So this is who she really is. These are unguarded moments where we've been able to see her in her past life, but we haven't seen her like this because she's had that one interview and she's been in a bubble as she campaigns. So tonight I think that the border is going to be top of mind of many people in this country, whether it's the crime, the fentanyl, or just the illegality and the unfairness of letting people just run into our country, stay here 7 or 8 years, have their case heard, if they even respond to have their case heard. And I think the Vice President has shown herself and was appointed a leader in this area, and she's been a miserable failure.
Well, there's good reason why we haven't seen Kamala Harris out campaigning in some of these key Senate battleground states like Montana or Ohio, because Kamala Harris is the most liberal candidate running for president the Democrat Party has ever nominated. And don't take my word for it. Washington Post Philip Bump said on August 13th, 2020, and I quote, in 2017, Harris was the 8th most liberal U.S. senator. In 2018, 4th. And as she prepared a 2020 presidential run, she became the most liberal, joining Senators Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand, all of whom also ran, end quote. Kamala Harris is also the least electable of 10 possible Democrat nominees. And don't take my word for it, that was the New York Times that talked about that this past summer. She is unelectable because her positions are radical. She called the border wall a waste of taxpayer money. She called to ban fracking. She called to defund the police. She co-sponsored legislation to mandate electric vehicles. She tried to change her positions, but the American people are now onto her. And as the New York Times poll from this past weekend shows, that shine is wearing off. The American people are smart. They know that Kamala Harris is not only a liberal, she's disingenuous because she's tried to change her positions. And don't take my word for it. When asked about Kamala Harris's flip-flops, Bernie Sanders said Kamala Harris is, quote, doing what she thinks is right to win the election. But Bernie also said at that same time, I do consider her a progressive. She has the Bernie Sanders seal of approval as being a progressive. So if you like San Francisco politics, you're going to love Kamala Harris. In other words, Kamala Harris is still the radical, out-of-touch California liberal that she's always been. And the American people know it and will right this ship 8 weeks from today.
Do you support the House strategy to push government funding until March and also include the SAVE Act in there? Or do you agree with Leader Schumer that this is going to result in a shutdown?
Well, I think we first have to see what the House sends us, and then, of course, how to handle that will be up to the majority leader. I would remind you, I've been both. Majority's better. But the first step ought to be what comes out of the House, and I think we don't know right now.
Having seen a lot of these government funding battles yourself, there are some Republicans who argue the SAVE Act is worth risking a shutdown just 5 weeks before the election. Do you think that could jeopardize Republican prospects?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you think a government shutdown, if it happens over the SAVE Act, could jeopardize Republican prospects in the election?
A government shutdown is always a bad idea at any time.
Donald Trump just posted on Truth Social that he believes that Republicans should shut down the government if they don't get the SAVE Act or election security passed ahead of the election. Do you agree with that?
Well, as I just said, shutting down the government is always a bad idea, no matter what time of year it is.
McConnell, your friend Dick Cheney over the weekend endorsed Kamala Harris. He called Trump the single biggest threat to the republic in its history. Should Republicans listen to Dick Cheney, or is he wrong?
Well, you'd have to ask the Cheneys about that. Thank you.
You don't have any opinion on that?